Why did everyone go silent the moment he entered the courtroom? No one knew his name. No one cared to. But that morning in Northwood County, a man walked into a courthouse that would never forget him again. It was supposed to be routine. A traffic citation. A cold Wednesday in February, the kind where frost still clings to the courthouse windows, and even justice feels tired. The air smelled of dust and paper, the kind that's absorbed decades of arguments, verdicts, and forgotten lives. Benjamin Dawson opened the heavy wooden door with his left hand. His right carried the small hand of his 11-year-old son. The boy's name was Ethan. He wore a jacket one size too big, and eyes far too old for his age. The sound of the hinges echoed across the marble floor. Heads turned. Maybe it was the coat that caught their attention, olive green, worn thin, the kind issued to soldiers in wars the country had already moved past. It hung on him like memory. On the left breast, a few tarnished medals, dull, scratched but carefully pinned. Not displayed for pride, just held close like reminders of something too heavy to speak aloud. A low murmur rose from the gallery. The bailiff looked up. The clerk stopped typing. And behind the bench, Judge Trent Albertson, a man who mistook control for character, raised an eyebrow. Ben didn't notice, or maybe he did but chose not to react. He guided Ethan toward the defense table, each step quiet but steady. It wasn't defiance that carried him forward. It was something else. Something older. The kind of stillness that comes from surviving things no courtroom could ever comprehend. From the back row, Clare Donovan watched in silence. Public defender, late 30s, sharp eyes, sharper instincts. She'd seen men like him before, men the system chewed up and labeled. But there was something in this one's gait that made her pause her pen mid-note. He moved like someone who used to follow orders and had long since learned when to stop taking them. The judge's gavel struck once. All rise. Wood creaked. Ben and Ethan stood. When the room sat again, Albertson leaned forward, eyes fixed on the coat. He smiled, thin and crooked. "Mr. Dawson," he said into the microphone, voice dripping with authority, "we appreciate you dressing up for the occasion, but this isn't a costume party." A few laughs bubbled from the benches. Claire's stomach turned. She'd seen cruelty in this room before, but never so casual. Ben didn't flinch. "This is my service uniform, Your Honor," he said softly. "It's all I have left that still fits." The words hung in the air, heavy, simple, unshakable. Albertson leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. Those medals, they real. The courtroom went still. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to quiet. Ethan looked up at his father, confused. Ben's answer came slow, even not defensive, just honest. They were awarded in places most people try to forget. Albertson scoffed. "Right, and I suppose you've got a Medal of Honor tucked in your sock drawer, too." Laughter again, louder this time. Ben said nothing. His hand rested on Ethan's shoulder, steadying the boy who'd started to shrink under the noise. Claire sat up straighter. Her heart thumped against her ribs. She wanted to say something to stop it, but she'd learned this court well. Albertson didn't like interruptions. He liked control. "Your Honor," the bailiff said quietly, "shall I?" Albertson waved him off. "No, no, let's see how long this act lasts." Claire's jaw tightened. She'd seen mockery before, but never this deliberate. And yet Ben didn't react. He stood there unbothered, almost calm. Like he'd already faced 1,000 versions of this same disrespect, in different uniforms, under different flags. Albertson's smirk faded just slightly. Maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the calmness. Men like him didn't know how to handle dignity. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Dawson, kindly remove that coat before we proceed. I won't have distractions in my courtroom." Ben shook his head once. With respect, Your Honor, it's cold outside. We came here by bus. This is all I have to keep my boy warm. I'm not asking, Albertson snapped. This is a court, not a parade ground. Claire's voice cut through before she could stop herself. Your Honor, with respect, there's no statute barring a defendant from wearing a military uniform in court. If anything. Miss Donovan, Albertson interrupted sharply, you are not this man's counsel. No, sir, Clare said, steady now, but someone should be. A few heads turned. A flicker of surprise crossed Ben's face. Then a faint smile, gratitude without words. He shook his head gently. I'll speak for myself, ma'am, but thank you. Albertson sighed loudly. Let the record show the defendant is being difficult. The clerk typed without meeting anyone's eyes. Ethan gripped his father's sleeve tighter. He whispered, Dad, they're laughing. Ben placed his hand over Ethan. Let them, son. Truth doesn't need applause. That's when Clare realized it, the insignia on his shoulder. Barely visible under the frayed fabric, a small eagle clutching a downward sword. Her pulse quickened. She'd seen it once before on a file she was never supposed to read. Delta Force. No, that couldn't be right. Those men didn't end up here, not in traffic court, not like this. But before she could think further, Albertson's voice cracked through the silence again. Remove the coat, Mr. Dawson, or I will hold you in contempt. Ben's jaw flexed once, then he nodded. Slowly, deliberately, he began unbuttoning the coat, one clasp at a time. The sound echoed like the ticking of a clock. Each button fell like a small surrender the room didn't deserve to witness. He folded the coat carefully, metals turned inward, then set it on the table. Underneath, he wore a faded gray shirt, sleeves frayed, collar limp. He looked ordinary now, painfully so. Albertson smiled. Much better, now we can proceed like civilized people. That's when Ethan stood. His small voice trembled, but it carried. My dad is civilized, he said. He's more decent than anyone I've ever met. The courtroom froze. The gavel slammed down hard. Sit down, young man. Ethan's eyes brimmed. He didn't do anything wrong. Ben knelt beside him, voice steady. Ethan, he whispered, it's okay. But it's not, the boy whispered back. They laughed at you. Ben smiled faintly, not with joy but grace. Sometimes people say things they don't understand. If we let their anger steal our peace, then they win twice. Claire's throat tightened. She defended hundreds of clients, most loud, broken, or desperate. But this man, he was quiet, measured. And somehow, his silence was louder than any argument she'd ever made. Albertson straightened, embarrassed that his authority had cracked. Mr. Dawson, he said harshly, you are held in contempt, $500, payable immediately. Clare stood so fast her chair screeched. Your Honor, objection. The defendant remained entirely respectful, his son. Sit down, Albertson barked. Clare didn't move. Then let me represent him, pro bono. The room went silent. Even Albertson hesitated, not because he agreed, but because he wasn't used to resistance. Fine, he muttered, if it gets us through this nonsense faster. Ben turned to Clare, genuinely surprised. You don't have to do this. She met his eyes. I know, that's why I'm doing it. He nodded once, thank you. The gavel struck again. Contempt stands, Albertson said sharply. Ben exhaled through his nose, steady as ever. I've paid higher prices for lesser causes, he said quietly. This one I'll pay standing. The hum of the lights faded, the room stilled. Something shifted in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that dignity had just taken the floor. And for a moment, no one, not even the judge, dared to move. From the back row, Clare couldn't look away. She didn't know who this man was, but every instinct in her said he wasn't just another defendant. There was a story under that coat. A truth buried so deep, it scared even the system that tried to silence it. Outside, the courthouse clock struck 10:03. Inside, no one realized that by tomorrow morning, this quiet hearing would ignite something far bigger than anyone imagined. And that a single act of mockery, one man's arrogance, would awaken ghosts the government itself had tried to forget. Ben Dawson didn't come here to prove anything. But by standing still, he had just begun to move mountains. What happens when silence refuses to disappear? Hours after the courtroom emptied, the echo of the gavel still hung in Clare Donovan's mind. She had defended hundreds of cases, yet none followed her home the way this one did. Maybe it was the boy's trembling voice. Maybe it was the calm in the father's eyes, that strange mixture of sorrow and restraint. Or maybe it was the insignia she shouldn't have recognized, but did. She sat in her narrow downtown office long after sunset, blinds half drawn, computer screen casting pale blue light across a desk cluttered with case files and cold coffee. Outside, traffic hummed like distant artillery. On her monitor glowed a single search bar. Benjamin Edward Dawson, military service verification. She pressed enter. Nothing. No enlistment record. No discharge. No VA benefits. Not even a mailing address beyond the small apartment listed on his citation. Claire frowned. That wasn't possible. Everyone left a trail, even ghosts. She tried again, widening the parameters. Still nothing. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, mocking her persistence. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe it was just a surplus store patch on a thrift store jacket. But no, her brother had worn that same eagle and sword emblem once, before he came home changed, before the nightmares and the silence. That insignia wasn't decoration. It was Delta. Her phone buzzed against the desk, a private number. She answered. Donovan. Claire, it's Mark Bishop. The voice was familiar, gravelly, laced with fatigue, and the kind of humor soldiers use to hide worry. She exhaled. Mark, you still owe me for that bar tab in Tacoma. He chuckled. And you still call me when you're about to break a rule. What's the favor this time? I need a background pull, off record. Name. Benjamin Dawson, possibly Delta, early 40s, lives near Northwood. The line went quiet, then Mark's voice dropped an octave. Where'd you hear that name? In court today, he represented himself. Judge mocked his medals, called them fake. His kid was there. Another pause, longer this time. Then softly, Claire, walk away. What? I mean it. That name's not supposed to exist anymore. Her pulse quickened. He's being fined for contempt because he wouldn't take off his coat, Mark, that's all. You don't understand. His tone shifted, no longer a friend, an officer's. If that name reappeared, it means someone up the chain just got very nervous. I'll call you back. Mark. Click deadline. Claire stared at her phone. The screen dimmed. The office suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. She swiveled toward the window. Across the street, courthouse lights still burned on the third floor, Judge Albertson's chambers. She could picture him there, sipping coffee from that smug justice never sleeps mug, probably congratulating himself for keeping order. She whispered to the empty room, "Order isn't justice, you bastard." Then, gathering her notes, she started typing. By dawn, a low fog crawled across Northwood County. The courthouse stood gray against a washed-out sky, a stone relic pretending to hold morality. Inside, Judge Albertson did what he always did, rehearse control. He sat behind his desk, scrolling through the docket, eyes narrowing when he reached State v. Dawson. He muttered under his breath, "Stolen valor, that's what this is." He typed the phrase into his browser, scanning precedent cases like ammunition he could load for the next hearing. To him, law wasn't about compassion. It was a weapon, clean, procedural, absolute. Men like Benjamin Dawson threatened that order. Men who stood straight and silent made him feel small. He didn't like feeling small. He took another sip of coffee. It was bitter. Maybe because guilt always is. At the same hour, 2 floors below, District Attorney Thomas Reed sat in his office replaying the hearing footage. He'd requested it out of curiosity, not conscience. But by the third replay, something inside him twisted. The man's stillness, the way he folded that coat slow, reverent like a burial flag. You can fake anger, Reed thought. You can fake outrage, but you can't fake dignity. He leaned back, whispering to himself, what if we're the ones making the mistake? Across town, the morning light crept through thin curtains into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment above a shuttered auto shop. Ben stirred a pot of oatmeal, while Ethan sat at the kitchen table drawing in a notebook. Steam rose between them. Silence filled the rest. The boy broke it first. "Dad, are they gonna take you to jail?" Ben smiled gently. "No, buddy, we just have to pay a fine." "But we don't have $500. Ben stirred the spoon slowly. "Then we'll pay it another way." Ethan frowned. "How?" "By keeping our heads up." The answer didn't make sense to the boy, but it sounded strong, and that was enough for now. He looked down at his drawing. A stick-figure courtroom, a man standing tall while shadows loomed behind him. Above it, he'd written, "I believe my dad." Ben noticed, smiled faintly, and kept stirring. He'd been through worse storms, but none had ever involved his son's tears. Claire arrived at the courthouse early that morning. Exhaustion wrapped around her like a second coat. She clutched a cup of stale coffee, and a single printed note mark had finally texted her before disappearing again. Classified DOD clearance Omega, do not pursue. 3 words underlined twice, Protocol Trinity activated. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew enough to recognize fear disguised as red tape. Whatever Dawson was, he wasn't a fraud. Her office phone rang again. She jumped. Unknown number. "This is Clare Donovan." "Ms. Donovan, this is Captain Lane, Fort Lewis Operations Command. You were in contact with Officer Bishop last night." "Yes." "You are to remain at your current location. Do not contact Mr. Dawson or discuss this case with anyone outside your immediate office. A representative will arrive within the hour." "Wait, why?" "Because the name you submitted triggered Protocol Trinity. And ma'am, that's not something we take lightly." Click. Claire stared at the silent receiver, her breath fogged in the cold air. Protocol Trinity. What the hell had she stepped into? Meanwhile, Benjamin Dawson walked Ethan to school. He kept his hands buried in his pockets, collar up against the wind. Other parents watched but didn't speak. The online video had already made its rounds, shaky footage captioned, "Man pretends to be soldier, judge exposes him." Ethan had seen the thumbnail on a friend's phone before the teacher snatched it away. Now he kept his head low as they reached the gates. Ben crouched to meet his eyes. "Listen, son," he said softly, "people will talk, let them. The truth doesn't need defending." Ethan nodded, but his lip trembled. Ben placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Go on, be you, that's enough." The boy walked toward the schoolyard, clutching his backpack straps like armor. Ben watched until the bell rang, then turned back toward the empty street, shoulders squared against whispers he could feel but not hear. Back in Fort Lewis, hundreds of miles away, a secure operations room flickered to life. Red lights pulsed, no alarms, just controlled urgency. At the center of the room stood General Dana Brooks. 4 stars, iron poise, eyes that had seen too much. She looked at the paused image on a wall monitor, a courtroom still frame. A man in a gray shirt, his boy beside him, the folded coat on the table. The tech officer cleared his throat. General confirmation. Subject Dawson Benjamin E. resurfaced yesterday, Northwood County Traffic Court. Brooks said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, I want the unedited feed. When the video played, she didn't blink. Her face remained still, but the room could feel her heartbeat. After a minute she whispered, "He's alive." The aide beside her frowned. "Ma'am. 21 years ago, Fallujah. Operation Black Dust. He pulled me from under a collapsed wall, saved 6 of us before disappearing off the roster." She exhaled slowly, hands clasped behind her back. "They buried his record to protect a cover-up. I tried to find him once. They said he didn't exist." She turned to the aide. "He does now." "Orders, ma'am." "Get the bird ready. Northwood's 42 minutes by air." "You're going there personally." Her jaw tightened. "If I don't, they'll bury him again, and this time it won't be the enemy's fault." The day after the hearing, the judge's nameplate gleamed under courthouse lights as if nothing had happened. But behind the polished veneer, fault lines were spreading. Public Defender Clare filed a motion to vacate the contempt charge, citing judicial bias and abuse of authority. Albertson ignored it, calling it grandstanding. Still, the paperwork was on record. The pressure had begun. Outside, frost melted on the courthouse steps. A handful of veterans, older men in worn jackets, gathered quietly by the entrance. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. One of them placed a folded note on the railing. It read simply, "We know who he is." That evening, Ben sat by the window in his dim apartment. Ethan slept on the couch, homework open, pencil still in hand. Outside, streetlights flickered. Ben's eyes traced the horizon, unfocused, somewhere far beyond. He whispered to no one, "I didn't want this." The words fogged the glass, faded, disappeared like ghosts leaving no evidence. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. He opened it slowly. A woman stood there in uniform, posture perfect, eyes sharp with memory. "Hello, Ben," she said quietly. "It's been a long time." He exhaled, disbelief softening into recognition. "Dana." General Brooks stepped inside, closing the door behind her. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between them. "I saw the video," she said finally, "and I saw the boy." Ben looked down. "He doesn't deserve this." "No," she said, "he deserves the truth, and so do you." She opened a small metal case she'd carried. Inside, a sealed envelope stamped Department of Defense, Omega clearance. She met his eyes. "It's time, Ben. Tomorrow that courtroom learns who you really are." Ben's shoulders sagged. "I never wanted the spotlight." She smiled faintly. "Then let me hold it. You just stand there like you always did." He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look soldiers share when words would only get in the way. Then he nodded once. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the city, fading into the distance. Inside, 2 veterans, ghosts of different wars, stood in the dim light of a forgotten apartment, preparing to remind the world what honor actually looks like. Why did the courtroom feel different that morning? Because everyone could sense it. Something was coming. Something the walls of justice had never seen before. The Northwood County Courthouse, usually half empty for a midday civil hearing, was overflowing. Spectators filled every pew, phones hidden in coat pockets, eyes curious, cynical, hungry. A few veterans sat together near the back, quiet, steady, their faces unreadable. They weren't there for gossip. They were there because they'd seen the video. And because silence, even from strangers, demands witnesses. At the defense table sat Benjamin Dawson, head slightly bowed, hands folded. Beside him, Clare arranged her notes with restless precision. She'd slept 2 hours, if that, haunted by the midnight visit she'd heard about but hadn't seen, a rumor spreading through whispers that a high-ranking officer had flown into town. Her throat was dry. She checked her phone under the table. Still nothing from Mark Bishop. Still no confirmation from Fort Lewis. Only one unread message from an unknown number. Stand firm. The truth travels its own path. She didn't know who sent it, but she hoped it was enough. The gavel struck. All rise. Judge Trent Albertson entered, robe flowing behind him like authority stitched in black. He smiled, the kind of smile that believes it already won. Good morning, everyone. Let's bring some order back to this circus. Clare's stomach turned. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the file before him. This hearing concerns the defendant's outstanding contempt fine and the psychological evaluation ordered by this court. Clare stood. Your Honor, again we object. Mr. Dawson has shown no erratic behavior, his only. Sit down, Ms. Donovan, Albertson interrupted. Your client disobeyed direct orders. Contempt was justified. Ben said nothing. He sat still, thumb brushing the edge of his folded coat, that same coat, resting quietly on the table. It wasn't defiance, it was grounding. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Dawson, do you understand the consequences if you refuse this evaluation? I understand the words, Ben replied calmly. I question their purpose. Laughter rippled from a few seats. The judge smirked. Careful, Mr. Dawson. Pride has cost better men their freedom. Ben's eyes lifted, slow, deliberate. Maybe, Your Honor, but not their honor. The words hit harder than any shout. Even the bailiff shifted uneasily. And then, a sound, barely audible. The creak of the courtroom door opening. At first, no one turned, but when polished heels clicked against the tile, crisp, measured, military, every head turned at once. 2 officers entered, uniforms gleaming, posture razor straight. They parted at the aisle, and between them walked General Dana Brooks. 4 silver stars on her shoulders, eyes like winter steel. Authority that didn't need to shout to be obeyed. The air changed. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum lower, as if realizing they were in the presence of something larger. She walked the aisle slowly, deliberately, her boots sounding like a drumbeat of history approaching. When she reached the defense table, she stopped. For a long breath, she simply looked at Ben Dawson. Then, in one precise motion, she raised her hand and saluted. Not ceremony, not performance. Respect. Sergeant Major Dawson, she said, voice ringing clear across the stunned courtroom. It is an honor to stand in your presence again. Gasps scattered through the gallery. The bailiff's pen clattered to the floor. A veteran in the back stood up and removed his cap without being told. Ben rose slowly, returned the salute. Hello, Dana, he said quietly. Been a long time. She nodded once, too long. Clare's mouth went dry. She felt her pulse in her ears. Every cell in her body whispered the same question. Who is this man? The judge finally found his voice. Excuse me, what is the meaning of this? General Brooks turned toward him, every syllable sharpened by composure. Your Honor, I am General Dana Brooks, Commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force Pacific. I appear on direct authorization from the Department of Defense. Albertson stammered. This is a civilian proceeding. You have no jurisdiction. She lifted a sealed envelope, the red Omega stamp catching the light. That's because the department does not ask permission to correct a disgrace, Judge. It acts. Silence. Then the slow creak of wooden pews as half the room leaned forward, breath held. Brooks stepped closer to the bench, placing the envelope before him. This man is not a fraud. He is a decorated veteran of operations most will never hear about. Medal of Honor nominee, Silver Star recipient, former Delta Force field commander. The judge's eyes darted to the documents, scanning seals, signatures, pages thick with citations and commendations. His face drained of color. Why wasn't any of this on file? Because men like Sergeant Dawson don't seek attention, Dana said quietly. They serve, they vanish, until someone drags them into the light for ridicule. She turned, voice lowering, but the entire room still heard her. And that is what you did. Albertson sat frozen, the gavel limp in his hand. Ben looked down for a moment, then back up. I didn't come here for recognition, he said softly, just to pay a ticket. Dana's lips curved, not a smile, a sadness disguised as pride. And you ended up reminding a courtroom what integrity looks like. Ethan reached for his father's hand, fingers trembling, eyes wide. Ben squeezed once. The boy's grip steadied. The room remained silent, as if afraid sound might break the sanctity that had descended upon it. Claire's throat tightened. She could barely breathe. She'd spent years defending the forgotten, the judged, the silenced. And now she was watching redemption arrive not with anger, but with truth. Albertson swallowed. General Brooks, I wasn't aware. Dana cut him off gently but firmly. No, you weren't aware because you didn't care to look. Each word hit like quiet thunder. You mocked a man who protected the very freedom that lets you hold that gavel. You questioned his honor in front of his child. And when he stayed silent, you mistook that silence for guilt. The judge's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ben stepped forward. His voice was calm, stripped of anything performative. Your Honor, I wore that coat because it's mine, because it keeps me warm, and because it reminds me of those who didn't come home, that's all. Ethan blinked back tears, standing now beside him, chin raised. He didn't fully understand protocol, but he understood respect. He felt it vibrate in the air like a prayer. Dana turned toward the bench. With your permission, she said, I'd like to submit a formal acknowledgement of Sergeant Dawson's service, signed by the Secretary of Defense, and request that all charges, including contempt, be vacated. Claire's voice joined hers, steady and fierce. And further, we move to seal these proceedings to protect classified identities under DoD Omega protocols. Albertson could only nod, granted. The gavel came down once, softer than it ever had before. It didn't sound like authority. It sounded like apology. Outside, the winter light had shifted, a soft gold spilling across the courthouse steps. Reporters waited, cameras ready, but the usual chaos never came. No shouting, no microphones thrust forward. Just quiet reverence. Ben emerged first, Ethan at his side. Clare followed a step behind, holding the file that had changed everything. General Brooks walked beside them, hat tucked under her arm, eyes on the flagpole swaying gently above the entrance. A breeze caught the edges of the stars and stripes. Dana paused. Funny thing, she said quietly. I used to salute that flag out of duty. Today I salute it out of gratitude. Ben looked at her. You don't owe me that. Maybe not, she said, but some debts are worth paying anyway. Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, why'd she salute you? Ben knelt to meet his eyes. Because once, a long time ago, I stood up when others couldn't, and sometimes people remember. The boy nodded slowly. I think she remembers a lot. Ben smiled, the kind that carries both pain and peace. Yeah, son, she does. Behind them, the courthouse doors closed. Inside, Judge Albertson sat alone at the bench, the weight of his robe heavier than it had ever been. In front of him lay the sealed file stamped Omega, cleared. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered the only sentence that felt honest. I was wrong. But outside, under the wide, forgiving sky, the man he'd wronged didn't hear him. He was already walking away, not victorious, not vindictive, just whole. Because dignity doesn't shout. It simply stands. And that's what Benjamin Dawson had done all along. How fast can truth travel? Faster than sound, faster than rumor, because truth doesn't need permission to move. By noon the next day, the courthouse footage was everywhere. Not the edited clip that once mocked him, but the real one. The moment a general walked in, saluted a man the internet had laughed at, and silenced a room full of doubters. No commentary, no dramatic music, just that moment. That quiet salute. It spread across platforms like wildfire finding dry grass. Judge mocked single dad veteran, general sets record straight. Millions watched, millions paused. And somewhere between the headlines and the hashtags, people started to remember something they'd forgotten: humility. Clare Donovan sat in her office, phone vibrating nonstop on her desk. Calls from reporters, invitations to speak, requests for statements. She ignored most of them. Instead, she stared at the image frozen on her screen: Ben Dawson and his son, standing together as sunlight broke through the courthouse windows. For the first time in years, she felt quiet. Not the tired kind, the kind that comes after a storm. Her mind replayed every moment. The judge's laughter. Ethan's trembling voice. The way Ben never raised his. She whispered to herself, he never fought back and somehow he still won. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up. Mark Bishop stepped into her office, rumpled uniform, duffel still slung over one shoulder, exhaustion clinging to him like dust. "You look like hell," she said. "Yeah," he replied, heard the same from the base commander. He tossed a manila folder onto her desk. "Declassified as of this morning. You earned the right to know." Claire opened it carefully. Inside were after-action reports, photos blurred with age, names blacked out. But one sentence stood clear under a faded header. Sergeant Major Benjamin E. Dawson, Operation Black Dust, extraction of Allied personnel Fallujah, 6 rescued. Status, presumed KIA. She exhaled, presumed dead. Mark nodded. That's why you couldn't find him. He walked away before they could bury him in paper. Why? Because sometimes the mission doesn't end when the war does. Because some men come home, but peace doesn't. Claire closed the folder slowly. Then why surface now? He gave a small shrug. Maybe fate got tired of waiting. She stared out the window, street below filled with reporters, veterans, people holding flags. Northwood had never looked so alive. "Mark," she asked softly, "you think he'll talk to me again?" He smiled faintly. "If he does, it won't be about himself. Men like him don't chase stories, they just keep living them." Across town, Judge Albertson sat alone in his chambers. The heavy curtains were drawn, his robe draped over the back of the chair like something shed and unwanted. On his desk lay the sealed duty file. Beside it a letter, handwritten. It wasn't official paper. Just plain white stock, folded twice. He opened it slowly. Inside, in neat cursive, were 5 words. "Dignity doesn't need an audience." No signature. But he knew who wrote it. He sat there for a long time, eyes burning, the sound of city traffic muffled by guilt. He'd spent a career believing power meant control. Now he realized control without humility isn't power, it's blindness. He whispered into the empty room, "God forgive me." The walls didn't answer. They rarely do. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment over a quiet street, Ben Dawson stood at the sink rinsing coffee grounds from an old tin mug. Ethan sat at the table, backpack open, cutting a newspaper article for a school project. Across the page, bold letters read, "General Honors Forgotten Hero." The boy grinned. "Dad, look, they even spelled our name right." Ben smiled, faint but warm. "That's a first." "Everyone at school said sorry," Ethan continued. "Even Mr. Halpern. He said he didn't know you were famous. Ben chuckled. I'm not famous, kiddo, just known for a minute. Is that bad? Ben looked at him for a long second. Sometimes, being seen isn't the same as being understood. Ethan frowned, trying to process it. So, what are we gonna do now? Same thing we always do. Ben dried the mug, set it aside. Keep moving forward, quietly. The boy nodded, accepting the simplicity. Then his eyes brightened. Can we visit Mom today? Ben's expression softened. Yeah, we'll stop by after lunch. The cemetery lay on a hill outside town, small and sun-warmed despite the cold wind. Ethan placed a small bouquet at the headstone, wildflowers he'd picked from behind their building. Ben stood beside him, hands in pockets, coat collar up. The name on the stone read, Sarah Dawson. Beloved wife, forever our home. Ethan traced the letters. Do you think she saw the video? Ben smiled faintly. If she did, she's probably laughing at me. Why? Because she always told me to speak up more. They both laughed, a quiet, healing kind of sound. Ben knelt, brushing dirt from the base of the stone. She'd be proud of you, son. You spoke when I couldn't. Ethan looked down, shy. I was scared. So was I, Ben said softly. But courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right while you are. The boy nodded, and together they stood in silence, the wind carrying their words to wherever love waits. Back in Washington, General Brooks stood in a briefing room surrounded by officers half her age. On the wall, a massive screen displayed news clips, public reactions, congressional statements demanding investigation into judicial misconduct. Brooks watched in silence. One colonel leaned forward. Ma'am, do you want us to issue an official statement? She shook her head. No, let the truth breathe on its own. Another asked, and Sergeant Dawson. He's done enough for this country, she said quietly. Let him live in peace. She turned off the monitor. The room dimmed. As she left, she paused by the doorway. You know, she said almost to herself, we decorate heroes for valor, but we forget the quiet ones, the ones who just refuse to break. We should start remembering them too. The young officers didn't respond. They just watched her go, the echo of her boots fading down the hall like a closing chapter. That night, Claire received a single text from an unlisted number. Tell the boy his father's service record has been restored, full honors, benefits reinstated. DB. She smiled. Dana Brooks. Even in her messages, precise as command lines. Claire looked at the framed picture on her desk, her own brother in uniform, the one who never came back whole. For the first time in years, she felt something unclench in her chest. She whispered, maybe there's hope for all of them yet. The next morning dawned golden. Ben and Ethan walked through the park, frost melting into the grass. A group of kids from school ran up to Ethan, shouting his name, showing him phone screens. Memes, articles, messages of respect. Ethan smiled shyly, overwhelmed. Ben watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, eyes soft. He'd fought wars in silence. Now the battle for his son's pride was over. And he'd won it without firing a shot. Claire approached from the path, scarf fluttering in the wind. You didn't tell me you were famous now, she teased. Guess I missed the memo, he said. She handed him a small envelope. Judge Albertson's letter of apology, official seal and all, thought you'd want to see it. He looked at the envelope, turned it over once, then tucked it into his coat pocket without opening it. Some words are meant to stay unread, he said quietly. Claire smiled. You really are allergic to drama, huh? He chuckled. War cures you of needing applause. They walked a few steps in silence. Ethan ran ahead to feed ducks near the pond. The sunlight rippled off the water, soft and calm, like the world itself was exhaling. Claire looked at Ben. You know you could help people. There are programs, mentorships for vets, outreach. You'd be good at it. He nodded slowly. Maybe someday. Right now, I just want to be a dad. That's a mission too, she said. He smiled, maybe the most important one. Across town, in a small cafe near the courthouse, Judge Albertson signed his resignation letter. No one told him to. No one needed to. He looked out the window at the flag on the courthouse lawn. For the first time, he didn't see a symbol of authority. He saw a reminder. Sometimes justice doesn't live inside the courtroom. Sometimes it walks in wearing a worn coat and carrying nothing but truth. He sealed the envelope, placed his gavel beside it, and stood up. When he stepped outside, the cold hit his face like forgiveness. That evening, the town square filled with candles, veterans, families, children, strangers. No speeches, no politics, just light. General Brooks stood among them, unannounced. Claire noticed her from across the crowd and nodded once. Brooks returned the gesture, simple and proud. Then, one by one, people began to raise their candles higher, their glow reflecting off the flag above. A single wind swept through, but the flames held. Ben and Ethan stood near the center. Ethan whispered, "Dad, what are they doing?" Ben looked around at the faces, old, young, broken, hopeful. "They're remembering," he said softly. "Not me, just what matters." The boy nodded, candle trembling slightly in his hand. He whispered, "It's beautiful." Ben's eyes glistened. "Yeah, kiddo, it is." The bells from the church down the street began to chime. 1, 2, 3. And for that single moment, the entire town felt like a prayer. A prayer for dignity, for forgiveness, for all the names lost to silence and finally found. That night, when the lights went out and the last news headline faded, a line of narration could have closed the story, something simple, something earned. Sometimes heroes aren't loud. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. How long can peace stay quiet before the past starts whispering again? 3 weeks had passed since the salute that silenced a courtroom. Northwood had returned to its small-town rhythm, almost. Reporters left, flags faded from windows, but inside certain hearts something kept turning, an unease that peace alone couldn't quiet. Ben Dawson woke before dawn, the way soldiers do even when there's no reveille. He sat on the edge of his bed, the apartment dim, the city outside half awake. Ethan still slept on the couch, wrapped in a blanket printed with airplanes. Ben listened to his breathing, slow, even, and smiled. For a moment, life was simple again. But it never stays that way. He glanced at the small box on the dresser, his medals, newly cleaned, folded citation papers beside them. He hadn't touched them since that day. He promised himself never to need them again. He whispered, almost a prayer, "Let it stay quiet." But the universe doesn't take promises, it tests them. Across town, Clare Donovan stared at a stack of letters covering her desk. Invitations to interviews, legal panels, talk shows. Every envelope offered the same thing, exposure. She wanted none of it. She opened one anyway. A glossy invitation read, "The American Service Awards, honoring Sergeant Major Benjamin E. Dawson. Attendance requested." She exhaled. "Of course," she muttered. The world had decided to make a symbol out of the man who never wanted to be one. She typed a message. "To Ben Dawson. They want you in D.C. next month. You going to go?" She stared at the blinking cursor, then added, "If not for you, maybe for your son." She hit send. 2 states away, in a secure Pentagon sub-basement, General Dana Brooks stood over a table of declassified files. Most were stamped black dust, restricted access. She flipped open one binder, photographs, coordinates, after-action notes. Every page stung like a memory, trying to claw back into daylight. An aide entered quietly. "Ma'am, the secretary's office called again. They want to know why you reopened the file." Brooks didn't look up, because the story isn't finished. "With respect, ma'am, it was 21 years ago." She turned one page and stopped. There, a name she hadn't seen since that night. "Lt. Col Victor Hale." She read the marginal note beside it. "Command order to seal incident initiated by Hale." Her jaw tightened. 21 years ago, Hale buried the truth. Dawson carried it. "Ma'am, get me everything on Hale. I don't care if he's retired or hiding in a desert. Find him." That evening, Ben and Ethan ate dinner at the kitchen table, canned soup and buttered bread. Ethan talked about school. Ben mostly listened. He'd always been good at that, letting silence do the heavy lifting. "Dad," Ethan said between bites, "Mrs. Patterson said they might make a movie about you." Ben nearly choked on his soup. "A movie?" "Yeah, she said you're famous now, like Captain America but real." Ben smiled softly. "If they ever make that movie, tell them to leave me out of it." "Why?" "Because heroes don't get to choose how they're remembered, son. They only choose how they act." Ethan frowned, then nodded slowly. "So, you'd rather be forgotten?" Ben looked at him, eyes steady, tired, kind. "I'd rather be understood." The boy fell quiet, tracing a finger along the table's worn grain. Then, out of nowhere, "I still hear them, you know." Ben Spoon paused. "Hear who?" "The kids when they laughed at you." Ben reached across, resting his hand on his son. "Then remember this instead," he said. "Remember the silence after." The next morning, Claire found a man waiting by her office door, tall, sharp-jawed, wearing civilian clothes that fit too perfectly. "Ms. Donovan." "Yes." He flashed a badge too quickly to read. "Department of Defense Liaison. General Brooks requests your presence in D.C. tonight." She couldn't just call. She prefers discretion. Claire studied him. "What's this about?" He met her eyes, finishing what started in that courtroom. D.C. smelled of rain and power. Inside the Pentagon, Claire followed the liaison through corridors that looked identical until the world narrowed into a windowless conference room. Brooks waited there, sleeves rolled, eyes red from too little sleep. On the table, photos from Operation Black Dust, ruins, smoke, faces blurred. Claire hesitated. "Why am I here?" "Because you believed in him before the rest did," Brooks said. "Now I need someone outside the uniform to help him again." She pushed a photo forward, a grainy image of a convoy. "See that truck? It carried medical civilians. They were never listed in official reports. The team saved them, but command erased them to hide a failed order. Hale signed that erasure. Dawson took the blame when he refused to falsify the report." Claire frowned. "You're saying the reason he disappeared was loyalty," Brooks finished. "To the truth, not the system." Claire sank into the chair. "And now?" "Hale's running a security firm. Contract work overseas. But if this file goes public, he'll try to discredit Dawson again. I need to make sure that never happens." "Why tell me?" "Because the law listens to lawyers, not generals." Claire stared at the file, names crossed out, men lost, ghosts unburied. She whispered, "You're planning to expose him." Brooks met her eyes. "No, I'm planning to protect one of my own." Days later, Northwood's calm fractured again. Ben returned from the grocery store to find two men waiting by his building, dark suits, tinted car idling at the curb. They smiled too politely. "Mr. Dawson, we'd like a word." Ben recognized the type instantly. Government, maybe corporate, the kind of people who smile with their teeth and never their eyes. "I'm off duty," he said quietly. "Of course, just a conversation." Ethan peeked from the upstairs window, phone in hand. Ben gave him a small signal, "Stay put." One of the men opened a folder. "Word is, you're being considered for national recognition. Before that happens, our employer would like to ensure the accuracy of your service record." Ben's eyes narrowed. "And your employer is?" "Mr. Hale, Victor Hale." Silence. The name struck like a memory-turned blade. Ben stepped closer, voice low, calm. "You tell Hale I'm not hard to find, but next time he better come himself." He turned, walking inside before they could answer. The door shut with finality. Inside, Ethan's eyes were wide. Who were they? "Old ghosts," Ben said. "Ones that don't know they're dead yet." That night, thunder rolled outside as Claire called him. He answered on the first ring. "They came," he said before she could speak. "I know," she replied. "Brooks warned me Hale would move first." "So what now?" "We go public before he can twist it." "No," Ben said firmly. "Enough headlines, enough noise." "Ben, I fought to keep my men's names clean, not to drag theirs through politics." She hesitated. "He won't stop." "Then I'll stop him quietly," he said, voice calm as stone. "The same way I've lived." She closed her eyes. "You don't have to face him alone." He smiled faintly. "I never did. You're still here, aren't you?" Static filled the silence for a beat. Then the line went dead. At dawn, General Brooks boarded a helicopter bound for Northwood. The flight cut through low clouds, rotors thudding like a pulse against the horizon. She stared out the window, jaw tight. Beside her sat a briefcase marked classified, evidence file black dust. She whispered to herself, "If he won't fight for the truth, I will." The pilot glanced back. "Say again, ma'am." "Nothing, just keep us steady." Back on the ground, Ben packed a small duffel, not weapons, not uniforms. Just Ethan's drawings, a photo of Sarah, and the folded coat. He wasn't running. He was preparing, the way soldiers do before peace demands another battle. Ethan watched from the couch. "Are we leaving?" Ben shook his head. "No, we're just ready in case the past comes knocking again." The boy nodded, understanding more than his years should allow. That evening, thunder cracked over Northwood again, the same storm, circling back as if it, too, refused to let go. Claire arrived at the apartment drenched, clutching a folder. "You were right," she said breathlessly. "Hale's people leaked a fake report online, claims you falsified mission intel. It's already spreading." Ben exhaled slowly. "Then it's time." He opened the duffel, pulled out a small USB drive wrapped in cloth. "Everything he tried to bury, I kept it." Claire stared. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because truth without timing is just noise. Now it's time." He handed her the drive. "Give it to Brooks." "What about you?" "I'll draw the fire, she'll get the shot." Before she could argue, headlights flashed outside, black SUVs rolling up the street. Ben looked at her calm. "Get my son out the back." "Ben." "Now, Claire." His tone left no room for debate. She grabbed Ethan's hand, heart hammering, guiding him toward the rear staircase as rain poured harder. Ben stood in the doorway, shoulders squared, the old coat draped across his arm like a flag. Outside, shadows moved closer, silhouettes in the storm. He whispered to himself, "Let's finish this right this time." Across the dark sky, the faint thrum of helicopter blades grew louder, Brooks inbound. Lightning split the horizon. Rain hit the ground like applause. And somewhere between thunder and truth, the past and the present finally collided. What happens when the truth you've been running from finally comes knocking at your door? The storm hadn't stopped all night. Rain pounded the roof like a drumbeat of reckoning. Inside, Benjamin Dawson stood near the window, watching black SUVs idle on the street below. Headlights cut through the downpour like eyes searching for guilt. He didn't move. He didn't hide. He'd faced worse than rain and shadows. Down the hall, Claire whispered urgently, guiding Ethan toward the back exit. The boy clutched her hand, eyes wide, breath quick. "Is Dad coming?" She forced calm into her voice. "He will, just stay quiet, okay?" Thunder rolled again. Outside, car doors slammed. Ben reached for the old green coat on the chair, the one the judge had mocked, the one that had carried more truth than any courtroom ever could. He slipped it on. Not out of pride, out of memory. The door rattled once. Then came the voice, low, smooth, practiced. "Ben, it's been a long time." He didn't answer. The voice continued, closer now. "You don't have to make this difficult. We both know how this ends." Ben's jaw clenched. "Funny," he said. "You always did like to skip to the end." The lock turned, the door swung open. And there he was. Lt. Col. Victor Hale. 2 decades older, but the arrogance hadn't aged a day. Expensive coat, clean shoes, eyes that once looked at soldiers like chess pieces. He stepped inside, wiping rain from his cuff. "Still wearing the same relic," he said, nodding at Ben's uniform. "You never learned to move on." Ben didn't answer. He just watched, calm, still, unreadable. "You could have had everything," Hale continued. "Promotion, command. Instead, you threw it away because you couldn't follow a simple order." "That simple order," Ben said quietly, "would have killed civilians." "They were collateral," Hale snapped. "You don't win wars by second-guessing." Ben stepped closer. "You don't win wars by losing your soul." For a moment, neither spoke. Only the storm filled the silence, wind howling through cracks in the windows. Hale sighed, shaking his head. "You always had that righteous streak. That's why command couldn't keep you. Men like you make loyalty inconvenient." Ben's eyes stayed fixed on him. "And men like you make graves convenient." The words landed like a shot. Hale's smile faltered. "You think anyone cares now?" Hale said, voice rising. "It's been 20 years, the world moved on." "Then why are you here?" Ben asked. Hale's jaw tightened. "Because you're a problem again. That courtroom stunt, you turned yourself into a symbol, and symbols attract attention I can't afford." "You mean attention you don't deserve." Hale laughed, cold and bitter. "You think anyone will believe you over me? I'm a colonel, you're a washed-up ghost." Ben tilted his head slightly. "Then why are you sweating?" Thunder cracked again, louder, closer. The power flickered. For a heartbeat, everything went dark. Then came another sound, faint at first, then growing. Helicopter blades cutting through rain. Hale turned toward the window, realizing too late. Ben's calm voice filled the room. "You always forget one thing, Victor. Storms don't just wash away the dirt. Sometimes they reveal what's underneath." Floodlights bathed the street outside. The rotors thundered overhead. Through the blinding rain, a shape descended, General Dana Brooks, coat whipping in the wind, boots hitting the pavement hard. Soldiers followed, their movements precise, practiced. "Ben," she called, voice steady even against the storm, "stand down. We've got it from here." But Ben shook his head. "He needs to hear it first." Hale stepped back, realizing the trap had already closed. Brooks walked in, her uniform soaked, face carved with calm authority. "Victor Hale," she said coldly, "you're under arrest for falsification of military records, obstruction, and crimes under the Uniform Code of Justice related to Operation Black Dust." Hale laughed, brittle, desperate. "You can't touch me. I was acting under orders." "Whose?" Brooks demanded. He hesitated. Rain hammered harder, the silence suffocating. Ben stepped closer, voice low. "Say it, Victor. Say it wasn't your choice." Hale's jaw quivered. Then, barely audible, "Mine." That was enough. Brooks nodded to her men. "Take him." As they cuffed him, Hale looked back, sneering. "You think this changes anything? People forget. They always forget. Ben watched as they led him through the rain. Maybe, he said softly, but not the ones who mattered. When the rotors faded and the storm finally broke, the world felt strangely still. The apartment smelled of wet earth and gun oil. Brooke stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes on the dawn breaking through gray clouds. Ben sat on the couch, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. For the first time in years, the weight he carried didn't feel like burden, just memory. Brooks spoke without turning. You kept the evidence all these years. He nodded, buried it with Sarah's things, figured the truth deserved better company. She smiled faintly. She'd be proud. She'd tell me I took too long. They both laughed quietly. Claire entered then, drenched, holding Ethan close. The boy ran to his father, wrapping his arms tight around him. I told you he'd be okay, she whispered, brushing Ethan's hair back. Ben looked up at her. You got him out. She smiled. You gave me the plan, I just followed it. Brooks turned, watching the three of them, soldier, lawyer, child, the strange little family forged from chaos. For a moment, she saw what peace might actually look like. Then her radio crackled. General Brooks, command requests update. She lifted it. Target secured. File black dust closed, confirming exoneration of Sergeant Major Benjamin E. Dawson. The words echoed through the room like the first sunrise after a long night. Ben looked out at the horizon, clouds parting, light spilling through. He whispered, finally. Later that morning, the press caught fragments of the arrest. Headlines spread. Whistleblower veteran clears his name, corruption exposed. But Ben stayed silent. He didn't give interviews. He didn't celebrate. He just took Ethan to school, hand in hand, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Because for him, it hadn't. He wasn't proving anything. He was returning to what mattered. When they reached the gate, Ethan hesitated. Dad. Yeah. Does this mean it's over? Ben looked down at him, smile faint but real. It means we can start again. The boy grinned. Then let's start big. Ben laughed, really laughed, the sound light, unguarded, human. Back in D.C., Brooks filed her report. Every detail precise, every word measured. When she finished, she paused before signing the last page. She added a line beneath the official closure. Some wars never end, they just change shape. She closed the file, locked it away, and stood by her office window. Outside, the flag rippled in the wind, not as symbol but as memory. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ben. Thank you for standing when no one else would. She smiled and replied. You taught me how. That night in Northwood, the storm finally cleared. The sky stretched wide and blue, stars shining like clean promises. Ben sat on the fire escape, the city quiet beneath him. Claire joined him, 2 mugs of coffee steaming in the cool air. Feels strange, doesn't it, she said, being free. He nodded. Freedom's heavier than chains sometimes. She sipped her coffee. So what will you do now? He thought for a long moment. Maybe help other vets find their way home. Maybe teach Ethan how to fish. Maybe just be still. She smiled. You've earned stillness. He looked at her. No one earns peace, Claire. You just stop fighting it. Below them, streetlights glowed soft against wet pavement. Somewhere a flag hung limp in the night air, quiet, humble, real. Ben's eyes softened as he whispered, they'll forget my name and that's fine. I just hope they remember what silence can mean. Claire looked at him. What's that? That sometimes silence isn't surrender, he said. It's strength. She nodded, and you proved it. He smiled faintly. No, I just lived it. When dawn came again, it found Northwood at peace truly this time. Ethan's laughter echoed down the street. Claire opened her office early. Brooks received her final commendation quietly. And Ben Dawson, the man once mocked, then honored, then forgotten, sat by the window with coffee in hand, watching sunlight climb the walls. He closed his eyes, breathed, and for the first time in years, the sound of the world didn't feel like noise. It felt like forgiveness. How do you live after the noise stops? Weeks had folded into months. Winter thinned into the pale gray of spring, and Northwood learned to breathe again. The courthouse lawn, once crowded with cameras, now held only grass pushing through the mud. The world had moved on, but moving on didn't mean forgetting. Benjamin Dawson found work at a small mechanic's shop on the edge of town. Grease on his hands felt easier than metals on his chest. He liked the rhythm of tools, the clank of a socket wrench, the hiss of air. Machines made sense. They didn't lie. They broke, they healed, and they ran again. Every morning he walked Ethan to school, stopping by the same corner cafe where Clare Donovan waited with 2 coffees and that half-smile that meant you're late, but I forgive you. Their conversations were small grades, whether the town fair, but beneath the words lived an understanding. They had already shared the worst silence of their lives together. That was enough. At the Pentagon, General Dana Brooks sat before a congressional committee. Cameras lined the walls, reporters whispering names, senators reading statements that sounded rehearsed. The chairwoman spoke first. General Brooks, for the record, explained what led to the reopening of Operation Black Dust. Brooks leaned toward the microphone. A lie, she said simply, one that lasted 21 years. Gasps rippled through the room. She continued, voice calm but cutting. We buried soldiers to protect reputations. We sealed records to avoid shame. Sergeant Major Benjamin Dawson refused to falsify data that would have justified civilian deaths. For that, his career, his name was erased. When I learned the truth, I reopened the file. A senator leaned forward. General, are you suggesting the Department of Defense sanctioned this cover-up? Brooks met his eyes. I'm saying people inside it did. The department is a building, morality is a choice. The silence that followed was the kind that makes history. After the hearing, reporters swarmed. Brooks said only one thing before stepping into her car. Sometimes honor takes 20 years to arrive. It's still on time. In Northwood, the story replayed on every screen. Ethan watched from the couch, eyes bright. Dad, that's her, General Brooks. Ben smiled. Yeah, that's her. She said your name on TV. He nodded. I've heard. Ethan frowned suddenly. Does that mean you have to go back to the army? Ben chuckled. No, son, some wars you only fight once. The boy considered that, then smiled. Good, I like this war better, the one with pancakes. Ben laughed, a real full laugh that filled the small apartment like light. It had been a long time since joy sounded that easy. Claire's office had changed too. Veterans now came by quietly, asking for help, some with benefits, some with guilt, some just needing someone to listen without flinching. She never turned anyone away. One evening, as the sun lowered behind courthouse windows, a young soldier lingered in her doorway. Ma'am, he said, voice barely above a whisper, you're the one who helped that Dawson guy, right? She looked up, yes. He nodded, nervous. My unit, we got back from Syria last year. There's stuff they don't want us talking about. His eyes darted down. I don't want to end up like him. Claire stood, walked around the desk and handed him her card. Then start by telling the truth, she said, no matter how long it takes for someone to hear it. He nodded slowly, relief mixing with fear. Then he left. When the door closed, she exhaled, realizing something she hadn't before. Ben's silence had become her mission's voice. April 10th. The American Service Awards in D.C. Spotlights, cameras, applause rehearsed for glory. But amid the glitter stood one seat marked reserved, SGT Maj Benjamin E. Dawson. It remained empty. Claire attended in his place, sitting between Brooks and Ethan. The boy fidgeted with his tie. He's really not coming. Claire smiled. Your dad said awards are for people still trying to prove something. But he proved everything. Brooks leaned down, exactly why he doesn't need it. When Dawson's name was announced, the audience rose to their feet. The applause rolled like thunder in a friendly sky. Claire felt her eyes sting. Brooks clapped once firm, proud. Ethan stood tall, whispering, "That's my dad." No cameras turned toward them, and somehow that felt right. Back in Northwood, Ben sat on the porch steps of the mechanic's shop, watching dusk bleed into the streetlights. A radio inside played the award ceremony live. When his name echoed faintly from the speaker, he smiled and turned the dial down. He didn't need to hear it. He already knew who he was. Summer crept in quietly. Heat shimmered on asphalt, kids filled the park again, and the rhythm of normal life returned like a song that finally found its melody. One evening, Ben and Claire drove out to the edge of town, to the ridge that overlooked the valley. The same place where Sarah had once taken photos, years ago, before war and paperwork stole her husband's peace. They sat on the hood of Claire's truck, coffee between them, the horizon burning orange. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. "To what?" "The service." He shook his head. "You don't go back to ghosts, you learn to live with them." She nodded. "And are you?" He thought for a while. "I think so. Some days the quiet feels like peace. Some days it feels like absence, but both beat the noise." They sat without words for a long time, the kind of silence that means everything's finally said. Back in Washington, Brooks' aide knocked softly on her office door. "Ma'am, final confirmation. Hale's cooperation has led to full exposure of the falsified orders. Congress is closing the inquiry." Brooks signed the last document, exhaled. "Then close it quietly, no speeches." "Understood." As the aide left, Brooks opened her drawer and removed a small item wrapped in cloth. One of Ben's old unit patches he'd left behind years ago. She pinned it inside her jacket pocket, near her heart. "Rest easy, Sergeant," she whispered. "You carried more than anyone should have." Autumn came early that year. Leaves burned red over the courthouse square. Claire and Ben walked through the Veterans Memorial Park with Ethan between them. The boy ran ahead, pointing at names etched into black granite. "Dad, are you on here?" Ben smiled. "No, son, these are the ones who didn't get to come home." Ethan traced the letters, whispering them aloud as if keeping them alive. Claire watched Ben, the way his eyes softened when the boy spoke, the way the wind moved through the trees like a prayer. "You ever wonder," she said quietly, "why you survived?" Ben didn't answer right away, then softly, "Maybe so someone else could ask that question." She looked at him, "And find the answer." He nodded, "And find the answer." Later that evening they stopped by Sarah's grave again. Fresh flowers, small flag. The air was cool, almost kind. Ethan knelt, straightening the bouquet. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. "We're okay now." Ben placed a hand on his shoulder. "She knows." Claire stood a step behind, eyes wet, heart full. It felt less like mourning and more like meeting. The sun dipped low, scattering gold across the headstones. For a moment it looked like every name was glowing. That night in the quiet apartment, Ben wrote something in his notebook. His first words in years, not meant for mission reports or statements. Just words for himself. "The war is over, the silence stays. Maybe that's how peace sounds." He closed the notebook, slid it onto the shelf beside Sarah's photo. Then he turned off the light. Far away in her own home, Brooke sat at her kitchen table, uniform folded neatly on the chair beside her. She poured a small glass of whiskey, raised it toward the window. "To the quiet ones," she said softly, "the ones who never needed parades." She drank, then smiled, not from joy, but from understanding. The world had moved on, yes, but the echoes of that courtroom still lived in the hearts of everyone who'd been there. They didn't talk about it much. They didn't need to, because some moments don't fade, they settle. Like dust after a battle, like truth after denial. Ben Dawson had become something larger than his uniform, proof that silence, when it comes from integrity, can be louder than any speech. That winter, snow returned to Northwood. Ethan made footprints in the yard while Ben watched from the porch, mug of coffee warming his hands. The boy laughed, calling, "Come on, Dad." Ben hesitated, smiling, then stepped off the porch, boots crunching the snow. They built a crooked snowman together, scarf wrapped loosely, grin uneven but perfect. When they finished, Ethan looked up. "Think Mom can see it?" Ben looked at the sky. "I think she can see everything." They stood there for a long time, father and son, the world hushed under snow, the ghosts finally at rest. How do you end a story that was never meant to be told? Maybe you don't. Maybe you just live it until silence becomes enough. Years passed. The world changed, new wars, new faces, new names that filled the news cycles. But in Northwood, time moved differently. Slower, kinder. The small town that once whispered about the fake veteran now told stories of the man who stood tall. There was no plaque, no statue, just memory, and that was better. Because real honor doesn't need marble to last. Ethan Dawson was 18 now. Taller than his father, same calm eyes, same quiet strength. He wore a faded ROTC jacket and a chain around his neck, not gold, not silver. Just a single dog tag. His father's. The world called him the hero's kid. He didn't like that title. He just liked the man behind it. That morning, he stood by the porch where his father once drank coffee every sunrise. The mug still sat on the windowsill, chipped, clean, waiting. He glanced toward the small American flag, waving above the shop across the street. Then he whispered, "Hey, Dad," got in. The letter from the Air Force Academy rustled in his hand. Accepted. He smiled, proud, nervous, aching. Not for what he was about to become, but for the man who'd made him believe he could. A few hours later, Clare Donovan met him at the cafe, the same corner spot where she and Ben had shared quiet mornings years ago. She was older now, lines around her eyes, streaks of gray near her temples, but the spark in her voice hadn't faded. "So," she said, stirring her coffee, "you really did it." Ethan grinned. "Guess so. You think he'd be proud?" She smiled. He already was long before today. They sat for a moment in silence, the same way she used to sit with his father, familiar, peaceful. Then Ethan reached into his jacket and slid an envelope across the table. "For you." Claire frowned. "What's this?" "Something Dad wrote. Said if I ever went into the service, you should have it." Her hand trembled as she opened it. Inside, one sheet of paper, handwritten. "Claire, if you're reading this, it means the boy found his path. I figured you'd still be watching out for him, the way you once did for me. Don't let him become what the world expects. Let him become what's right. You always knew the difference. And thank you for standing beside the man everyone else had turned away from. Sometimes justice doesn't wear robes or medals. Sometimes it just sits across the table, drinking cold coffee and believing in people anyway." "Ben." Claire's eyes blurred. She folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest. "He never really left," she whispered. Ethan smiled. He wouldn't know how. At Arlington, General Dana Brooks stood under a gray morning sky, a small ceremony unfolding before her. It wasn't official, not televised, just a few soldiers, a few old friends, and a folded flag. The headstone was simple. "Benjamin E. Dawson, soldier, father, silence that spoke." She saluted once, crisp and clean. Her aide whispered, "Ma'am, you knew him well." She nodded, well enough to know he didn't want this. Then why give it? She smiled softly. Because some honors aren't for the living, they're for the rest of us so we don't forget how to stand. Back in Northwood, life rolled forward. The mechanic's shop became Dawson and Son Auto. Claire helped Ethan manage the paperwork, while he trained part-time at the local base before heading to the academy. The town's kids grew up hearing bits of the story, not from news, but from neighbors. They said he was quiet, that he never bragged, that he once faced down a judge and didn't raise his voice. And that somehow changed everything. One night just before Ethan left for training, he visited Sarah's grave with Claire. The stars were bright, the air cool, the world still. He knelt, tracing the carved names, both of them now together. "Mom, Dad, I'm going," he whispered. "Not to be like you, just to try and be worthy of you." Claire stood behind him, tears quiet on her face. "You already are, Ethan." He looked up at her. "You ever miss him?" "Every day," she said. "But some people don't leave holes when they're gone. They leave light." He was like that. Ethan nodded slowly, staring at the names. "Then I'll carry that light." Weeks later, he stood at the bus terminal, duffel over his shoulder. The early morning fog rolled through the valley, soft and golden. Claire stood beside him, hands in her coat pockets. "You sure you're ready?" she asked. "No," he said honestly, but he never was either. She smiled. "Then you'll do fine." He hugged her quick, tight, full of gratitude words couldn't cover. When the bus door closed, she stayed there, watching until the taillights disappeared beyond the curve. Then she whispered, "Go make your silence mean something too." Years passed again. And somewhere between duty and destiny, the name Dawson appeared once more, not in scandal this time, but in honor. Captain Ethan Dawson, Air Force pilot. The boy who once stood trembling in a courtroom was now flying humanitarian missions, carrying supplies to war zones, evacuating refugees from places most people couldn't pronounce. When asked in an interview what inspired him, he didn't mention medals or generals or fame. He just said, "My father once told me that truth doesn't need applause. It just needs someone to carry it forward." The clip went viral, but he didn't care. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was chasing meaning. Back home, Claire watched that interview from her porch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes glistening. The old coffee mug sat beside her, steam curling into the night air. She smiled to herself. He did it, Ben, he really did. She looked up at the stars, the same stars Sarah once photographed, the same ones Ben used to watch in silence, and whispered, "Your silence spoke loud enough for all of us." At the Pentagon, General Brooks, now retired, unpacked her belongings from a box. She placed one photo on her new desk at home. A candid shot someone had taken the day of that courtroom redemption. Ben, Ethan, and Claire, sunlight streaming behind them. Underneath, in neat handwriting, a caption read, "The day dignity stood tall." She stared at it for a long while, then smiled. Some stories don't need medals. They just need memory. Years later still, at a small town museum in Northwood, a simple exhibit opened. The quiet valor of Sergeant Major Dawson. Inside the glass case, his coat folded neatly. The medals pinned, just as they were that day in court. No spotlights, no pomp. Just a small plaque that read, "He never asked for recognition. He only asked to be believed." People came and went quietly, some saluting, some just standing still, as if silence was the only proper way to say thank you. In the very last scene, the one the narrator's voice softens for, Ethan returns home years later, in uniform, standing before the same case. He looks at the coat, the medals, the plaque. His reflection stares back from the glass. Claire, older now, joins him. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she says softly. "Yeah," he whispers, All this for a man who never wanted to be seen. She smiles faintly. That's why people remember him, because he didn't ask them to. He nods, eyes lingering on the coat. Then he whispers, "Thanks, Dad." And for just a moment in that still room, the air feels different, lighter, warmer, like presence without sound. The narrator's voice would slow here, softer, gentler, almost reverent. He never raised his voice. He never chased a medal. He never needed a stage. He just stood tall when others bowed. And when the world tried to mock him, he answered with silence, the kind that tells truth better than words ever could. Because real dignity doesn't perform. It doesn't shout. It simply acts. The music would swell, soft strings, faint drums, and fade to black.